Each amendment equally divided.
Mr. Whitfield, I'm going to recognize you. You have an amendment at the desk. Without objection, your amendment will be considered as read. You're recognized now for 2 minutes to argue for your amendment.
Well, Chairman Waxman, thank you very much, and Ranking Member Barton for working out this arrangement for us to talk about these important issues. My amendment is very simple. Every member of the Energy and Commerce Committee is all too familiar with the problem faced by physicians on their reimbursement rates from Medicare. Over the past several years, each year, Congress has intervened and has been required to intervene in order to stop a significant reduction in physician reimbursement rates. This amendment is very simple. It simply takes care permanently for this physician reimbursement problem, and it does so by replacing the broken payment formula, the sustainable growth rate, with stable annual updates based upon the Medicare Economic Index. It is time to stabilize this broken formula. The physician community has been very vocal about the need to make this a permanent fix, and that's precisely what this amendment does. It removes the sustainable growth rate. It bases it, moving forward, it bases the updates upon the Medicare Economic Index, which is widely used, and that is what this amendment does, and I would urge the adoption of the amendment.
Will the gentleman yield? Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Oh,
yes, yes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I referenced this in my opening statement. This is the singular most important issue for the practicing physician that affects our physician workforce. The ability for us to maintain a physician workforce and deliver the care for arguably our most complicated and vulnerable patients who are our senior citizens. I could have brought a graphic of the sustainable growth rate formula. In truth, I don't really understand it, but the very last function on the graph means that you go back for 15 years, grab all of the savings that you should have had while we've done these temporary fixes, and add it on to the end. That's been the problem. The cost of repealing the SGR is enormous because we have to go back and capture all the savings. What this amendment does is said that we're just going to reset the baseline and start all over again. Why is that critical? Well, this money is not real money. These dollars have already been spent. They have been doled out to the doctors, and the doctors have used them to run their businesses. It's not like this is money sitting in an account somewhere drawing interest. We have incurred the expense, but we haven't accounted for it on the books. If we were Bernie Madoff, we'd be sitting at home.
Mr. Burgess, the time of the gentleman who yielded to you has expired. And I know you're going to have an opportunity to speak further on this issue in your own amendment. So I'm sorry to cut you off, but the time has expired.
I would just urge my colleagues to recognize that this is the most singular important issue facing the practicing physician today in maintaining a viable physician workforce to take care of our Medicare patients in the future. You can't pay for performance if you don't have the doctors there to do the work.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair will recognize himself on this amendment and express my agreement with the fact that we need to do something about the Medicare physician payment formula, and I'm fully committed to doing so. Current protections for physicians are scheduled to expire in January 2010, at which point the physician fee schedule will be reduced by more than 20% from today's level. That schedule guarantees that we must revisit the physician payment system at some point this year. However, this vehicle is not the right place for fixing Medicare physician payments. Making payments in Medicare contingent on subsequent actions by Congress is a dangerous precedent, and I feel that we can have an opportunity to make a major investment in this nation's health infrastructure in this bill. We can't let that be derailed by other problems in Medicare. I do not know how much this amendment would even cost. Maybe Mr. Whitfield could give us a number on that, but I don't see a pay for, which would mean that is expanding the amount of money that would be spent in the stimulus bill to include the cost of the Medicare physician payment formula, and that would upset the whole balance of the bill, which does have strict parameters around it. I'd like to yield
will the gentleman yield for a question?
I'd like to yield to Mr. Pallone first.
Thank you, Mr. Waxman. Look, my estimate is, since this is a permanent fix to the SGR, that over 10 years, you'd basically be talking about $400 billion, which is more than the entire infrastructure package, the entire infrastructure section, all the roads, all the bridges, everything that we're doing for infrastructure in this stimulus package, which of course is not before this committee, is included in that. I think that it makes no sense for us to spend that kind of money without any in-depth analysis of what we're doing. And we are determined, you know, in the Health Subcommittee and to proceed and address this problem, but it shouldn't be part of the stimulus. I mean, I wouldn't have it substitute for all the infrastructure projects. We're very careful in what we do in this bill when it comes to the health provisions to try to come up with very specific.
My time has expired, and therefore the time that I've yielded to you has expired. All time on this amendment has expired.
Mr. Chairman, would you yield for a question?
You know, the problem is you'll have a question, someone will have an answer, someone will have another statement, and that defeats
I must have
the
missed
purpose.
getting the CBO report on the cost of the underlying bill because I don't have it in front of me.
I see. We'll proceed to a roll call vote on the Whitfield amendment. And my apologies to the gentleman.
Mr. Waxman?
No.
Mr. Waxman, no. Mr. Dingell? Mr. Markey? No. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Boucher? Mr. Pallone? No. Mr. Pallone, no. Mr. Gordon? No. Mr. Gordon, no. Mr. Rush? Ms. Eshoo? Ms. Eshoo, no. Mr. Stupak? Mr. Stupak, no. Mr. Engel? Mr. Engel, no. Mr. Green? Mr. Green, no. Ms. DeGette? Ms. DeGette, no. Mrs. Capps? Mr. Doyle? Ms. Harmon? Ms. Schakowsky? Ms. Schakowsky, no. Mr. Gonzalez? Mr. Gonzalez, no. Mr. Inslee? Mr. Inslee, no. Ms. Baldwin? Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Ross? Mr. Ross, no. Mr. Weiner? Mr. Weiner, no. Mr. Matheson? Mr. Butterfield? Mr. Butterfield, no. Mr. Melanson? Mr. Melanson, no. Mr. Barrow? Mr. Barrow votes no. Mr. Hill?
That replaces that.
Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui, no. Mrs. Christensen? Mrs. Christensen, no. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor, no. Mr. Sarbanes? Mr. Sarbanes, no. Mr. Murphy of Connecticut? Mr. Murphy of Connecticut, no. Mr. Space? Mr. Space, no. Mr. McNerney? No. Mr. McNerney, no. Ms. Sutton? Ms. Sutton, no. Mr. Braley? No. Mr. Braley, no. Mr. Welch? No. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Barton? Mr. Barton votes aye. Mr. Hall? Aye. Mr. Hall, aye. Mr. Upton? Mr. Stearns? Mr. Deal? Mr. Deal, aye. Mr. Whitfield? Mr. Whitfield, aye. Mr. Shimkus? Mr. Shattuck? Aye. Mr. Shattuck, aye. Mr. Blunt? Aye. Mr. Blunt, aye. Mr. Boyer? Aye. Mr. Boyer, aye. Mr. Radonovich? Mr. Pitts? Ms. Bonomack? Ms. Bonomack, aye. Mr. Walden? Mr. Walden, aye. Mr. Terry? Aye. Mr. Terry, aye. Mr. Rogers? Aye. Mr. Rogers, aye. Mrs. Myrick? Mr. Sullivan? Mr. Murphy of Pennsylvania. Mr. Murphy of Pennsylvania, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Blackburn. Mr. Gingrey. Mr. Gingrey, aye. Mr. Salas. Can't see him. Mr. Salas, aye. Okay. Ms. Capps, not recorded. Votes no. Ms. Capps votes no. Ms. Harmon. Ms. Harmon votes no.
Other members wish to respond to the vote?
Nope. No, Matthew.
Any other member wish to respond to the vote? If not, the clerk will tally the vote. One more is coming.
Mr. Rush votes aye. Oh, Mr. Rush votes no. Off aye on no.
And take it back.
Can't take it back. You like your aye vote. It'd actually be a good vote.
Any members voting aye wish to change their vote to no? Anybody voting no wish to change their vote to aye? Anybody wish to be recorded? Then the clerk will tally the vote.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, the ayes were 15, the nays were 31.
Ayes 15, nays 31. The amendment is not agreed to. Before we consider the next amendment, I want to ask unanimous consent that we add the words health information technology to section 3011C. Without objection, that'll be the order.
We have no objection, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Without objection, that'll be the order.